I have some great HOA stories for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Here's our first one. HOA lawsuit takedown time. My husband and kids and I live in a HOA co-op condo type area in a jurisdiction that historically has let HOAs run wild with power. My HOA was always very Karen-y, with everything from paint colors and plants and children's sounds, and especially screening prospective buyers, tenants, and those who otherwise resided in a home in the HOA. I'll skip the details, but as you know, HOAs and their rules historically were to keep out the undesirables. Choose your reason for undesirable, but it usually ends with some sort of ism or other common victims of housing discrimination, so like the undesirable, disabled, and type of families who have more than the US average of one or less kids per household. My spouse owns a second property in the HOA that he rents out, and what can I say? We're weird bleeding heart liberals and rented the apartment via Section 8, which is when the government subsidizes the rent for low-income people. However, the rent subsidy is well below fair market value for the middle-class neighborhood, so Section 8 apartments are rarely encountered in such nice areas. This was the only time that someone ever applied to rent with Section 8, and they allowed her, because the lawyer said there was no reason to deny her as income isn't a factor here and she has no criminal record and so on. However, from that day forth, there was a campaign of harassment and violations against her. Calling police, calling Section 8 to get her off the program, dozens of complaints that were ridiculous, often involving children being children or something that everyone else did, or rules so strict and old from pre-Fair Housing Act law, 1970s, like children can't be outside unattended until 18. They would especially try to enforce such insanity against her and anyone else that they decided that they didn't like. People really hate poor people living in their community. It's insane the drama that went on. I, of course, defended what I could, as the violations were aimed at my spouse, the landlord. I am very quiet and shy, and I'm a research attorney in an extremely specific narrow area of law. That is all I do. I analyze an extremely specific area of law, research, make up written arguments based on law and fact with backup documentation. Well, one day, this nastiness started getting out of hand, and my kids got targeted, and I went mama bear. My goodness, I went mama bear for my kids and my tenants' kids. I didn't know I had it in me because I'm a nose-in-a-book lawyer. As you know, HOAs leverage the power of the HOA attorney to get what they want because, unless the community's rich, if the HOA attorney goes after you, everyone folds because attorney fees are insane for the average person. And my community has no other attorneys or rich people who will pay $450 an hour to fight an HOA violation that's unfair and that can bankrupt them. So, when they sued my spouse, he didn't fold. They were surprised. Me, on the other hand, I'm a research attorney. The harassment was over several years, and as all autistic lawyers do, I saved and documented every piece of paper, email, convo, asked for clarification in writing from management for every board comment or manager comment from the day it all started. I pored over condo docs and researched the law, researched the changes in the law and the deficiencies in the HOA docs and the enforcement of illegal provisions. I'm a weirdo, I know, but I have a passion for this sort of stuff and I love to learn. That being said, I am not a litigator. I never once have been to court or even worked at a law firm that does that type of thing. I consult on a very specific type of legal issue and I apply it to a client's situation, but I don't procedurally argue anything in front of a court or file papers or do procedures. I just tell other lawyers and business people and advisors and so on my thoughts and they do what they need with it. It was sadly hilarious because my filings were full of procedural errors and the judge was sympathetic because he knew I was trying my best and I had a very valid legal argument with tons of well-organized evidence tailored to the law. But my goodness, there are so many rules with litigation down to the heading of a document and whether you used a magic word that I kept messing it up. But I would ignore the complaints of my amateur work and would just keep on plugging and fixing the error, trying again, getting state and federal housing agencies involved, and man, it was getting expensive for them to keep filing motions. They got so obsessed with this that the HOA managed to get sued by 2 other people because they spent all the money on legal fees instead of, say, fixing the giant pothole or the roof issue in front of someone's house. that the HOA is legally responsible for. So now, lenders won't lend to people to buy because it's too risky due to lawsuits. People had to sell for less and value went down because only cash buyers. Non-Karens who barely know what HOA exists are starting to ask questions. They're also starting to get subpoenaed by Fair Housing to answer the questions, such as, I would notate that my tenant got a citation for XYZ, and I would document non-Karen also did XYZ and got no violations. So now, non-Karen is getting asked questions about if the HOA ever cited her for the wrong type of barbecue grill allowed by the docks. Which, of course, they never did, except for my tenant, who has an issue to show selective enforcement. They retaliated by threatening to call the police next time that my kid breaks an HOA rule by being a child playing outside. Retaliation for fair housing complaints is very illegal. It was documented and witnessed. I went even more mama bear to the point that I scared my husband after that threat to my kids. So long story short, $50,000 in legal fees on their end, $400 in filing fees on my end, but too much of my free time, and the HOA finally begged me to settle the lawsuit that they started, call off the fair housing government investigators, and they will agree to leave me alone and change the HOA docs to comply with the law and stop being so Karen-y. They are now terrified of me, and I have been taking advantage by breaking every small rule imaginable, like unapproved plants, no grass, unallowed umbrellas, incorrect mailbox color, I free-range kids and ignore them, and all the other people under 50 have joined in, enjoying by doing such awful things, as replacing turf grass with invasive native plants, and the like, now that they know how the HOA is powerless. Look what you can do when you stand up to it and you actually have all the stuff in your corner to back it up. Oh my goodness, man. Terrible HOA story time. Today, I receive a citation from my HOA. Happy New Year's, now pay us. Through my landlord, saying that I'm violating the rules about having garbage out. Little background first. Been in this house for over a decade. Received a copy of the rules when I moved in, and the only mention of garbage was that it could only be put out on garbage day or the night before. Empty garbage can be by the street but tied up so it can't go anywhere. Untied only on garbage day. Only put out the garbage, actual trash, on garbage day as close to general pickup time as I can. This is a bear area, and bears come to visit occasionally around 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. I have seen them, and I watch them wishing that I had night vision photography capabilities. A few years ago, Colorado Springs enacted a code that everyone on the west side of town is only allowed to put out their garbage between 5 and 7 a.m. on garbage day, Wednesday, unless you have a bear-proof container to cut down on the delinquent bears. These hours are not convenient for anyone that I've met, but my issue isn't even really with the hours. The garbage companies don't provide bear-proof containers and refuse to pick up if you don't use their provided cans. Small house lot, only 2 feet of space on the side of the garage and the house before the lot line, which is required to be clear. Fenced-in backyard with 2-foot wide gate for access, and the entire exterior of the property can be seen from the street other than a few feet against the house in the backyard. The garbage can is a little over 2 feet wide. Health and size issues making it between incredibly painful and impossible, depending on the day, to even move my empty can when it gets blown over by the wind. I already have to keep food garbage in my fridge thanks to sinus issues, scented garbage bags don't do anything to help, and not being able to put anything outside unless it's 5 to 7 a.m. on Wednesday. So today, suddenly, I get a phone call and an email from my landlord saying that I have a citation for my garbage can being out on a non-pickup day. Just so happens, my neighbors put out their garbage, trash, recycling, and all Saturday night, next to my can where they always put it on garbage day. The picture that was included as evidence of my crime was a bad picture of clouds, so I have no idea what day or even time of day that they came by to exercise their little power trip, other than the sun was out and the clouds were bright. If the issue is from before that, then it would have to be from the beginning of December when my landlord was doing yard work and putting that in the can, which means that it's his fault. If they suddenly decided to have a problem with the empty, tied-up can that bears walk right past, Yes, I've watched it happen multiple times as they head for multiple other neighbors who always, for years, have had trash in their cans outside and untied. Well then, it has to be from someone on a sudden power trip going out and marking every little thing. Think Sheldon from Young Sheldon, nitpicking everything. I keep my trash inside my house until garbage day, when I then take it out and put it in the can, because I have no secure place to put my can. Now, the only solution I can see is getting rid of my can and garbage service and never throwing anything away. The can's too big to fit through the gate of the backyard, not that I can physically move it much anyway. The garage is too small for even proper access to 2 cars, let alone adding a garbage can into the mix. I'd have to move a car out to be parked in the street, which is a far worse crime to the HOA. Driveway's too narrow to move the can past a car, you even have to walk off the driveway just to walk around the car because it's barely a parking spot wide. And worse for the car, with the massive damaging hailstorms we get. Zoo animals get killed, and insurance companies don't want to provide coverage here anymore, partially because of the hail. I swear, HOAs are just kingdoms with a different name. Wasn't America founded for freedom from tyranny and oppression and kingdoms by extension? Why are HOAs allowed to exist? They nitpick over tiny inconsequential stuff and fine everyone for it, while not meeting their end of things, utility easements full of weeds, spreading to the neighbors so they can fine us for having weeds, charging for street lighting when there aren't street lights, not plowing snow when they need to, and so on. Last I checked, rule changes have to be approved by homeowners in meetings, which no one knows about, according to my landlord and the neighbors, and then distributed to all residents, renters, and owners alike. And unless I read it wrong, it looks like the HOA is in Minnesota and the neighborhood is in Colorado. Only a small part of the address was showing in the email. How does this make sense? It's supposed to be made up of the homeowners themselves, not some corporation somewhere. I have no way to contact the HOA myself, not that they listen to a renter anyway, as I have no phone number, email address, or even name for them, and my landlord won't provide it either. I just have to be a good sheep and roll over and do what I'm told, whether it's right or not. Do you agree with this? This says that it's the landlord's issue, not the renter's, and ask where that citation came from, the HOA or where. What would you do in this situation, and which tree would you bark up to find out who needs to be confronted? As we get into the next story, I have to tell you something. Hey, also I added more stories to the new 24/7 HOA Karen radio stream on the channel, perfect to binge or play for background noise while you sleep. Check out the link in the description or on the front page of the channel. It looks like this. HOA Revenge Time. My Grandpa's Revenge. This isn't my petty revenge story, but my grandpa's. About 15 or more years ago, my grandparents retired and moved to a gated community a couple of blocks from a decent-sized lake. Their house was near Lake Athens, Texas. My grandpa absolutely loves to get out of the house and fish, so retiring close to a lake was an absolute godsend for him. I remember going out on the lake and fishing with him multiple times growing up. He had a tracker boat that he would tow with his old 80-ish Chevy truck. Now, just so you know, this wasn't his daily driver. He used it strictly for towing his boat. When not in use, he would park it in a little alcove a few feet away from his driveway, surrounded by trees. Appearance-wise, this truck was not beautiful and had definitely seen better days, but it was still more than capable of taking his boat to and from the lake with no problems at all. Fast forward a few months, and he receives a letter from his next-door neighbor. It turns out they hate seeing his old truck, despite it being pretty well covered by trees, and believe that it ruins their enjoyment of looking outside their house. In the letter, they have stated that they have contacted the HOA multiple times with the goal of either fining him until he sells his truck or removes it completely from their view. My grandpa was ticked. He called his HOA to discuss the letter, and it turns out the HOA has shut down all of the neighbors' complaints, but they are persistent and keep sending more. Now here comes the revenge. My grandpa then asked if there would be any repercussions from chopping down a few trees on his property, the trees that also kept his Chevy moderately hidden from his pesky neighbors' peeping eyes. He gets the all clear and begins chopping away. His old beat-up Chevy that was once covered ever so carefully by the trees was now displayed bare in its entirety for the whole world to see. Needless to say, the Grinches next door were not happy to see his truck uncensored. From what I remember, they tried to complain again before deciding to move away. You must have a pretty pathetic life if the sight of someone's old truck is enough to make you pack up and leave. I mean, he knew how to hit him where it hurts, and that's the key here. It wasn't just trying to get back with a dinky little revenge. This did what it needed to do. What do you think? And just to show that things are the same in HOA, a guy at my wife's office lived in an HOA, and just a few months back, they had tossed out the entire board by recall, and this guy was one of the people elected to the new board to replace him. He was so concerned about the former members breaking into his garage to try to steal the HOA files that he stored them at his office. The disgruntled former board members managed to get the necessary 25% of the homeowners to sign a petition to remove the then current board. I thought that removing the entire board twice in 15 years was bad enough, but in this guy's community, they went through it twice in 1 year. What's even crazier about this is that he lives in a development with only 32 units. They have a board of 7, which is ridiculous for a community with only 32 members, and the 7 board members who originally were thrown out are currently ineligible to run for the newly vacated positions, as are the just removed board members. That leaves only 18 homeowners left to run for the 7 now vacant positions. But who's going to want to run for a board in a community where they completely removed the board twice inside of a year? At this rate, they're literally running out of people who could conceivably run. The following week, he told my wife that he decided that it was time to move, as his weekend's HOA activities included a fist fight between 2 women and a 12-year-old girl removed in a full Nelson by a grown man. It's the Petri dish principle on display. Is the yearly budget a secret? Posted by OK What the Heck. I ran for the HOA board because the relatively new association was headed off the rails in a few different ways. If there was no one close to hold people accountable and to ask the tough questions to force answers into the light of day, I could see it devolving into one of those stereotypical boards run by one guy who thinks he knows everything and most definitely does not know the meaning of leading from behind or collaboration. It's definitely my least favorite work to do, but I'm going to try and hang in there until it feels like there's health in both process and among the board members. Wishful thinking on that last one, perhaps. Anyway, this means that I'm relatively new to this type of miniature governing body and typical HOA must-dos. But what I'm not new to is an unwavering commitment to information transparency and implementing processes that achieve that. So, being relatively new to this domain and my focus on information transparency give rise to my question. Last night, there was an open meeting where the primary agenda item was to approve the budget for next year. The draft budget had not been shared with the community prior to the meeting, nor was it included in the packet that they were emailed that contained the agenda. The board president ran through that agenda item so fast it made my head spin. I'm the secretary taking notes. The manager started with a bit of an update on why there were increases, was interrupted by the president with a word salad of hand-wavy stuff, very quickly followed with, "Any questions?" Silence, because I think people were trying to process what was said, and then the motion to accept the budget, and bam, it was done. In my naivety, I figured there would be a presentation of the actual numbers later in the meeting, or that a period of community review would be announced with a way to collect feedback. But nope, no such thing. That was it. Is this normal? This is people's money, and we have a right to examine and reflect, yes? Surely being in an HOA doesn't change that, does it? OP gives more info to this comment. The board is responsible for creating and approving the budget, not the owners, so while the owners are allowed to see the budget, they have no input into what is included in the budget. Draft budgets are usually only between board members and management, and it's your responsibility as a board member to review and vote on the proposed budget. And OP replies, "Absolutely agreed on who is responsible and has influence on the budget. That wasn't my question though. It had to do with visibility into the budget at the community level and when that was required to take place, if at all. What would you do if you were in the poster's shoes?" HOA story time. The neighbor wants OP to pay maintenance on his second home. No way. So the key players are me, 22 female, first-time renter, recently graduated university. Edwin, a 70-year-old male, extremely posh second homeowner. When me and my fiance, both early 20s at the time, were looking for our first place together, we ended up looking at a lot of flats. Most were way out of what we could afford and were really bad quality, like damp and dirty or no light and so on. So we were really pleased to find a great 2-bed flat that was within budget in a great location, right between the student side of town and a leafy, affluent suburb. The flat was in a small housing complex of about 20 flats. Each flat was in a block of 4 and 2 on the ground floor and 2 on the first floor, which is second floor to Americans. I don't know if it was actually designed for retirees, but it turns out that pretty much everyone who lived there was elderly. Our oldest neighbor was 102 years old, and most of the others were 70 plus. Beneath our flat lived 2 widowed elderly people, and the flat next to ours was vacant. Our landlady told us it belonged to a man named Edwin, the Karen of this story, who lived in a very large house on the next street over, and bought the flat as overflow, so when he had family visiting, he didn't have to host them in his own home. So we moved in, and things were going great, at first. The downstairs neighbors were really friendly, and they seemed happy to have young people about. I'd do a bit of shopping for the 102-year-old, and I'd say hello to the others if I passed them in the shared area. We never saw or heard anyone in the flat next to ours. However, the first winter after we moved in, though, a slight damp problem in the bedrooms started to get worse. We told the landlady, who got it investigated, and it turned out the whole roof was rotten and needed replacing. The landlady assured us that the HOA would pay for most of the cost, and her and Edwin were liable for the rest. No problem, we thought. Except one day, I got a knock on the door, and a smartly dressed and well-spoken old man was on my doorstep. He introduced himself as Edwin, and after a bit of polite but awkward chit-chat, I asked if I could help him with anything. Yes, you can, actually. It's about this roof problem I'm hearing about. What are you thinking you'll do about it? Oh, you'll have to speak to the landlady about that. She knows all the details about the contractor. Well, I don't want to bother her. I assumed you'll be fixing it as you're the only one affected. I'm confused and I say, no, as landlady, it's her responsibility to maintain the property. It's the property owners that are liable. But she and I don't even use this place. You're here, and I think it's only fair you contribute to the place that you're living in. I don't think so. That's why I'm paying her rent each month. I think you should do the decent thing and offer to pay the full cost. It's crazy expecting us pensioners to pay for you. I politely told him that he'd need to talk to the landlady and close the door, shaking my head at the audacity of this wealthy, privileged man to, for one, hoard a good quality home without using it in an area where there's a severe lack of decent housing. He refused to pay upkeep on the property that he's purchased, and he asked a young renter to pay money to fix his problem. Essentially to pay into his equity, while I would get no long-term benefit. Edwin must have taken his complaints to the landlady in HOA, because the roof never did get fixed. Worth noting that, in addition to the flat we rented, our landlady rented out several other properties and also lived in one of the very large houses nearby. I suspect, as her and Edwin were neighbors, they decided to avoid bad blood by simply ignoring the issues and flobbing us off. We spent the next 4 winters opening windows, blasting the heating, and scraping mold off the walls until we'd finally saved up enough deposit to buy our own place. I mean, this feels like it's illegal, like you should tell the board what's going on. Well, how can they just make you pay for their stuff? And it just does not add up to me. Does it add up to you? Let me know. OP's parents are giving them an ultimatum. Pay for our house or else. This could go bad fast. Let me know what you'd do. Hi everyone, my parents, 66 mom, 65 dad, are looking to retire and are about to sell their house. They'll most likely get around $500,000 from the sale, which they'll put towards the new house. We all used to live with them, my family and my sisters, but we've all moved out, so they can't afford the current mortgage payment. According to their calculations, the new mortgage would be $100,000, and the monthly payment would be $1,000, not including property taxes, utilities, and HOA. Last night, they gave us 3 options. They do a reverse mortgage and we don't get anything from their inheritance. They move out of state. I don't consider this an option at all. Or we pay split the mortgage payment, $500 each. Apparently, based on what they'll be getting from Social Security and their 401k, they won't have much to live off of after paying the mortgage payment. My dad's full Social Security retirement is age 67, and if he works for another 2 years, he'll get another $700 to $800 a month. But he obviously doesn't seem keen on the idea, especially since the location they're looking to move to will turn his 10-minute commute into a 30-minute to 1-hour one. They've told us to think of this as an investment and that the property value will go up over time, which I'm sure it will since we're in California. It just seems like a long commitment, like over 15 years, and I eventually want to buy my own home. I'm 29, about to turn 30. I'm married and have 2 kids. I make a good income, $210,000, not including bonuses, so we can afford the $500 a month. The other worry I have is on my sister's side, as their situation isn't really as stable as ours, and I could end up having to pay the full $1,000 myself. I'm leaning towards helping them out, helping myself out as well. They've done so much for me, and I feel obligated. I'm just curious if there's any other options they have. There's $500,000 equity in their current house, and I feel like paying the mortgage is the best thing to do for myself and them as well, but I just want to make sure I'm making the right decision. Do you agree with this comment? What happens if down the road they need a nursing home or long-term care, and they need to sell the house you've been paying for to fund it? You should probably talk with a lawyer who handles estate planning. Does this feel like that they're just being taken advantage of? Like, hey, we're going to pull your inheritance, or you have to pay for this, or we're just going to leave. And I just don't know. There's so many things that they need to lawyer up and just get this thing handled carefully. It could go wrong fast. What do you think? HOA story time. What to do with my Karen neighbor with an update. I moved into my townhouse a few months back and quickly realized just how crazy one of my neighbors is. The day after the old owners moved out, there was an ordinance violation from the city on my door saying that we left trash out on the curb for too long. The old owners called the trash company to pick up their stuff when they moved, but Karen still sent a notice on them to the city because she hated them. She even told us that she was specifically being petty because they never took care of their property. And that's where my issue with her comes in. There's a little front area with a tree and a space for flowers and bushes, and the old owners did neglect it a bit, so the first thing I did was rip out all the old dead plants. I covered the ground with new soil and spread some seed mix for pollinating flowers. There was no life in that old soil, so I figured I'll just spread this mix and see what grows. A few weeks later, I get a warning in my mail from the HOA that there's too many weeds and I have to pull them out. I text the president and I say that it's flowers budding and they're not weeds. She says, fine, and that's done. Everything overgrew a tad, so I went out and ripped out all the overgrown plants and trimmed it down. Yesterday, someone from the HOA is out in the front, trimming the budding branches off the front tree. I've never seen her, so I go out to ask what they're doing, and she says that she's HOA, and I go back inside. I go back to my office, which overlooks the front, and lo and behold, Karen is crap talking me to the HOA lady for 10 minutes. She's making crazy gestures to our house and throwing out accusations about how we don't take care of the property. No one wants to look at it. Look how pretty theirs is, and blah blah. She also throws out some of our other neighbors under the bus, including one who has the giant mailbox for all the units at the end of their driveway. She said even though it's city property, they should be taking care of it. How dare they? So Tuesday night is a board meeting, and I'm considering going just to shut down Karen, but I'm not sure what approach to bring to the table. Do I be overly nice and maliciously compliant? Do I be a petty bee back? I could bring up that Karen throws a garage sale every single weekend for her insane couponing stock that she can't get rid of, and cars always block my driveway because of it. I don't know what to do, and this is my first time dealing with an HOA, so how should I proceed? Update. So I went to the meeting yesterday, and it was only a few people on the board plus Karen, who I guess is an alternate. She looked ticked when I walked over and said to everyone, "Hey, she's my new neighbor, the one that moved into the crazy people's house." You might ask, why were the previous owners crazy? Because she never saw them leave the house. Frankly, they were probably smart if they were able to avoid her 24/7 surveillance of the driveway. I went into the conversation with an open mind and waited for her to make any comments. I, at least, was able to put in that some people may be unaware of their regulations regarding landscaping, and making that explicit and objective as possible would be helpful, so I'm glad that I went. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure the HOA would try to leave it up to subjective judgments. Also, some noted that the HOA probably knows that she's loony, but they think she's perfectly normal, even after she said that she cuts the grass missed by the contractor lawnmower with scissors. Do Do you agree with this? Look through the Sydney ordinance to see if there are rules on garage sales or home business. Report her if she's not following the rules, like needing a permit. Check to see if the HOA allows home business as well. If she's selling enough stuff, the IRS might be interested. What do you think? OP and father versus the HOA. I'm a little fuzzy on exactly when this was, but for loose context, it's 2018-ish. We're living in this little two-story in a subdivision in upstate South Carolina, which my parents still own. My family just had a full run of renovations done on the house. A kitchen remodel, new floors, wallpaper removed, new paint on the walls, and so on. The folks who painted did an especially good job, and since they were a small local business, they wanted to know if they could put up a little sign in our yard just for a few days as advertisement. You know, like those little plastic type yard signs, nothing big or fancy. My dad was happy to oblige and showed them where to put it to avoid the sprinkler system. Everything's great. 2 days later, a letter arrives in our mailbox. It's from the HOA, and according to the bylaws, no signage can be placed in a yard for more than 24 hours. We hadn't been planning to leave it up more than a few days, maybe a week at the most, but to be told that supporting a small business was an eyesore came well out of left field. This is the part where I tell you that my father, despite being a very considerate and respectful man, has something of a problem with authority, especially when that authority is arbitrarily telling him what to do on his own property. First thing he does is pull out his copy of the neighborhood bylaws. He and my mother both look over it, and lo and behold, the quoted passage does indeed state that no signage or similar mode of advertisement is to be displayed in a yard for more than 24 hours. Not one to go down quietly, my father took to combing through the applicable section, looking for any loophole that he could find, and he found it in the word yard. 2 or 3 days after that, one of the ladies who worked for the HOA came down to our house to personally ask us to remove the sign. She and my dad stepped out on the front porch and must have been out there for nearly half an hour. I don't think I heard him say anything other than the occasional or yes ma'am until the very end. See, the sign was no longer in our yard. It was in the flower bed. Other parts of the bylaws, even in the cited section, distinguished the flower bed as separate from the yard, and since this particular clause mentioned the yard alone, the flower bed must have been fair game. And he told this, honestly quite nice, woman as much, without so much as knitting his brows or raising his voice. The sign stayed in our flower bed, perhaps out of spite, for nearly another month before we finally took it down. I love the malicious compliance HOA. Would you do the same thing as this OP's dad did? Let me know. HOA Karen put a lien on my house, but I'm not even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you find out what happens to that HOA, and I'll see you there.